How does a common person, how does a layman understand where we are economically?
So let me first say that there is no doubt that our place in the world is changing very, very rapidly. So yes, we are already in US dollar terms, the world's fifth largest economy. But in purchasing power terms, if you adjust for purchasing power, we are already the world's third largest economy. And we are growing also the world's fastest. So in about 18 months or so, we will go past Germany. In maybe 3 years' time, we will be going past Japan as well. To in sheer bulk terms, the world's third largest economy.
Right.
Okay, so we will be about somewhere in the $5 trillion mark. Now, that doesn't mean that poverty has disappeared from India.
No.
We will be the world's third largest economy, but the largest population. So once you divide it by the population, we are still a poor country. Our per capita income will still be low, but not as low as it used to be, first of all.
Right.
Okay, so it's rising, number one. Number two, there are some advantages to sheer scale. Okay, first of all, it means that the way we interact with the rest of the world changes because we can now push our way around in ways that we simply could not have done in the past.
Right.
Right? We can get involved in writing the world's rules. Earlier, we were just takers of somebody else's rules. The way we negotiate trade deals, for example, changes as a result of this. But also, sheer economic strength allows for economies of scale in terms of the industries we create. It means the kinds of tax revenue we generate. Even if we are redistributing to the poor or building infrastructure, we can imagine it in scales we just could not have done till very, very recently in the past. So all of this dynamics begins to change and begins to flip over. So take, for example, China. Okay, as recently as the early 1990s, their per capita income and their economy was basically in the same ballpark as ours. Then they went through this big growth spurt, and suddenly many things began to flip in their favor. It's a different matter that they are currently having some economic problems, but there's no doubt that they are in a totally different place from where they were in 1990.
Agreed.
Right? So our game is to do the exact same thing over the next 20-25 years.
Right.
Now, we are beginning to do it. Let's not get euphoric. This is the beginning of the game. But we are finally beginning to generate the kinds of dynamics we can say could be a sustainable level shift in our economic performance and then feeding through to other things in terms of economic power, welfare of the people, quality of life, all the other things that you want to have as, a global power that you want to have. But finally, we are reaching the tipping point where these things will become affordable for an increasing number of people, and it will expand over time.
Right.
And the game, by the way, is of compounding.
Right.
So if anybody who in the audience who knows about compound interest rates, and if you learned that in arithmetic class in class 7 or 8 or wherever when you learn it, you will learn that initially you know that things are moving, but it's only after a while that compounding effect really begins to gallop.
Right.
So we are reaching a point by maybe the end of this decade, it will really begin to gallop. That same growth rate will be generating enormous amounts of actual dollars.
Right. Sir, I don't know why you say it's not, we're not ready enough to be euphoric, because this makes me so euphoric. If this is the beginning, where are we really going? Right?
No. That's the point. That's precisely why I'm trying to calm people down. Look, we've got to sustain this for 25 years.
Right.
So,
so one fair way to look at
फुटबॉल गेम में पहले 15 मिनट में गोल स्कोर किया तो अच्छी बात है, बट बाकी मैच भी खेलना है.
Right. So, sir, one fair way to look at this would be that abhi the growth curve, the exponential sort of increase in this compound interest way is only beginning to happen.
Yes.
Right? And I want to ask you, sir, because when we talk about this, there is necessarily a mention of pehle aisa nahi tha, and now we are seeing more and more of this. Now, I can think of one big change in the Indian economic scene that happens in 1991.
Yes.
Which is we go from being a more closed off, more like non-privatized economy to a more liberal, globalized, the LPG, whatever. Is that the reason? Is that the compounding we are now realizing in 2023-24? Or is there a different change that I haven't noticed necessarily that has occurred over the last 10, 15, 20 years?
Both.
Both.
So one big shift that happens in 1991 is undoubted.
Right.
I mean, before that, we were a closed, license permit Raj, socialist economy. We just didn't aspire for anything bigger. And then 1991 happens. By the way, it's important to remember that it is forced on us. I mean, 1991, I was around in college at that time.
Right.
It's not like the Indian economists of that time were
Were
all
visionaries
and they were demanding. All that happened is our economy collapsed, our closest ally, the Soviet Union, collapsed. We had no choice but to reform. So we reformed. So, but it turned out to be a good thing.
Right.
As a result of which, finally, some new dynamic began to emerge. All this IT sector, etc., that we're talking about, began to emerge, and so on and so forth. And then we began to see a more liberal, market-oriented, more efficient economy, and we began to generate this growth dynamic. However, this has been stops and starts. So there have been some reforms in the beginning, the original Manmohan Singh, Narasimha Rao reforms. Then once the economy got going, because we hadn't it wasn't something that we were really bought into. We did some because we had to. We got some growth and then we all stopped again.
Right.
Then after a little while, it again began to peter out. There was the Asian crisis in 1997, 98, that period.
Right.
Then during the Vajpayee era, again there is a little bit of reform. There is some effort to clean up the economy, get some infrastructure. So the first attempt at creating modern infrastructure happens in the Vajpayee era.
2001-2.
That total was 2000, 2001, 2002.
Right.
Now that generates some growth dynamic. Again, that generates a period of growth. But then even that begins to peter out by about 2006-07. And then of course there's a world financial crisis. At this juncture, we don't do new reforms. What we do is we try to use the banking sector to expand credit and keep the growth going. So during this period, starting from 2007, 8, 9, 10, there is massive expansion in bank credit without reforms being done along with it. So what is happening is just pumping up the system.
Right.
So many of these things, these loans that were given out, by certainly from 2013, 14, 15, they all go sour.
There's no securities underneath.
Yeah, so all this infrastructure or even corporate capacities we create, they begin to go bad. So the banks begin to break down. So now what happens is that no reforms have been done. So the point I'm making is, we do reforms, we get a phase of growth, and then it kind of breaks down after a while. And after a while, we are forced to do another round of reforms. So this is what then again starts after 2014. So another round of reforms happens. Now this round of reforms happens under this Prime Minister. And there are a whole bunch of them. So one big reform is anchoring our macroeconomics and inflation. So remember, we used to always be a high inflation country.
Right.
So 8 to 12% inflation. We were never an Argentina type high inflation country, but we were a high inflation country in the 8 to 12% inflation. We create a monetary policy committee, create inflation targeting, we bring it down to the 2 to 6% range. So that is one big reform.
Massive.
Then we create a GST system.
Right.
Because before GST, every state has its own tax system.
Right.
Causes all kinds of confusion. So now what happens, you create a GST system for the whole country. So I always say this is a free trade agreement India signed with itself.
Right.
Right. So now goods can go across without hindrance.
Right.
Then you have something called insolvency and bankruptcy code. Why is this important? Because if you want creative destruction, you want innovation, some of it will go wrong. You want a system by which all the innovations that went wrong, all the risk taking that went wrong, is continuously cleared up in the banking system so that you can clean it up and do another round of risk taking.
Right.
So the insolvency and bankruptcy code happened. Now all of these reforms began to happen. Then finally, major, next layer of large infrastructure began to get built. So all of this started in the last decade or so. Then, of course, we got hit by COVID. That, of course, 2 years of chaos, as you all know. But even there, I would say we did a good job in terms of managing the economic situation, rolling out our own vaccination program and all that. That was, although those 2 years in some ways was loss, but nevertheless, the one good thing happened as a result is that our own confidence in ourselves as a country, did get boosted. Right. And so when we came out of this period, we came out with an economy that had already gone through some reforms before, managed the COVID period much better than anyone else without blowing up our monetary and fiscal resources. And we were still in 2022 still standing, whereas most other economies were really wobbling.
Right.
And then since 22 and now in the end of 23, we are clearly our economy has recovered very dramatically, and as you know, it is by some margin the fastest growing economy of any size in the world. And all this compounding process we were talking about earlier
Right.
is beginning to happen.